Adaptations are tricky. Taking a book and adapting it into a movie, you often have to walk this very fine line. How faithful do you be to the source material? How respectful? How slavish? How much do you insert yourself as a writer into that work? How much do you want to change? How much do you want to edit? How much do you want to add? It's this balancing act that, I don't know if there are any figures on this, but it's always hit and miss. You always do find movies that take books, beloved books, celebrated ones, and adapt them. Often having to live up to the expectations of the book, but then also trying to be their own creation, then trying to be their own sort of creative effort. That's, I think, what typifies The Long Walk. This is the last picture show with Abdul Rahim Khan. I was going to say A. Rahim Khan, but I never introduced myself like that. And today I'll be reviewing The Long Walk, a book that I personally love. I think it's perhaps the only Stephen King book that I've read. Generally because I guess I don't like the horror genre, in written form. Of course, I've seen a lot of his stuff, the ones that have been adapted, of course. And this book is an achievement in itself, is that it is his very first, when he was writing under the name Richard Bachman. And certain books, novels, stories have this ability to assume the currency of myth, where they are so well written, so well conceived, that they go beyond the page and just assume this characteristic that sort of passes into legend. And I think there's so many books like that. But while I could sort of devote an entire episode here to that very subject, I'm just going to stick to The Long Walk and sort of how it affected me, and how it is one of perhaps the very first, but at least one of the OGs of sort of that YA dystopian genre, which I perhaps am maybe, I wouldn't say belittling it by, but at least reducing it to this level, where you have, the Hunger Games. And the reason why I'm even mentioning the Hunger Games is its director, Francis Lawrence, is of course director of The Long Walk. But there was something about this book that from the very moment they take their first steps, I was sort of enraptured until the very last page. And knowing that this movie was coming out, I was somewhat on the fence, because I like Francis Lawrence because, he's given us Constantine, he's given us I Am Legend. But then all of the stuff that he did with sort of the Hunger Games and all of that stuff, I think I kind of lost interest in him as a director. And then, of course, there were those qualms about, sort of adapting a sort of a beloved work like The Long Walk, and maybe making a hash out of it, maybe just not doing it justice. Of course, you're not going to stick around until the very end of the show, so you're going to ask me, sort of in the very first moments of this review, do they do it justice? And I would say yes. Maybe not 100%. There are minor quibbles. There are certain issues, I would say, in the script and in the filmmaking, but those are wholly the viewer is rewarded for their patience, because on paper, of course, the story, the narrative is plodding. It in the sense that the very premise, and for those of you who are not familiar with the book, it is a dystopian America. They have apparently suffered some sort of cataclysmic civil war or war. It is going through a depression. This is sort of the landscape, the people, their garb, the cars, all is like sort of 60s America, 50s, 60s America. There is an apparent dictatorial regime in America, presided over by the Major. In this case, played by Mark Hamill's Luke Skywalker, really bringing in his voice acting career, because you would have never known that sort of like, Luke Skywalker would go on to be Joker in Batman, the animated series. So sort of that register he brings to this role. And as a means to perhaps galvanize the American public, to make America great again, so to speak, this competition, the Long Walk, has been constituted, has been created, in which 100 young men, and it's mostly teenagers, are picked by lottery and are meant to walk literally until they die. There is no finish line, and the only winner is the last man standing. And those who do fall behind are shot, and they have to maintain a pace. In the book it was 4 miles an hour. In the movie they've reduced that to 3 miles an hour, and they have to maintain a certain pace. They are given 3 warnings. They can walk those warnings off, blah, blah, blah. There's all of those things. That's, of course, the premise, and the very nature of this movie, sort of in which you have characters, and I'm starting off from the book, in which you just have characters walking endlessly, sort of the Sisyphean task, and it's just conversations with them. It is these stream of consciousness moments. So sort of like, trying to adapt that on screen. And then, of course, keeping it limited. Sort of the runtime, you have to bear that in mind too. I don't think it was an easy task for the scriptwriter, J.T. Molnar, if I'm getting that right. And I'll tell you where he triumphs, and that is in the second half. The first half, I would have to say, it comes off a little rushed. It comes off perhaps a little wary of its subject matter, because the thing is that how do you kind of introduce this concept to an audience, hook them, keep them sort of going with the characters, give a damn about these characters, and also do that with very, I'm not saying that it's not, that there isn't sort of action, so to speak, or there aren't incidents or moments that sort of punctuate these conversations, but it's not easy. The book, of course, takes its time to sort of build up a momentum, very much like the walkers themselves. You have the characters, and bit by bit they slowly sort of start telling them their backstories, introducing themselves, conversations, so on. And I would say that the first half is a little unsure of the subject matter. It is unsure of what to do with itself as a movie, and it's unsure what to do with itself, with how to sort of present the story. And that, I think, and this is a bit of a spoiler, well, it is a spoiler, is sort of like, demonstrated, where within, I would say, almost 10 minutes of the movie, you have your first casualty. It comes off almost forced, that they had to sort of like, just quickly put this there to tell audiences that, hey, wait a second, this isn't just sort of like, a summer stroll in Maine. This is something you've never seen before. And that's where I think that kind of threw me off initially. I was like, I don't think they've understood that sort of cadence that the book had. And sort of translating that to the screen, also, they didn't understand that. you have them sort of walking in this sort of, I wouldn't even call it a wasteland. I mean, it is green. It's not sort of the Dust Bowl or anything like that. But I mean, sort of, it's pretty run down. It's not the kind of, America that perhaps you would expect to see. But that's something that's quite different in the book, where you do see the walkers pass through like these one-dog towns, sort of literally on their last legs. And you do have spectators to this spectacle. That's sort of all there. But what sustained me, and this, I think, is the film's crowning achievement, of course the latter half is as well, is of course the cast. I tip my hat to the casting director. I tip my hat to the script for this particular aspect, to the director, and to the actors themselves for letting the cast, because again, as I'm sort of started initially by saying, when you do have like sort of one-track story, it's literally one track. The thing that's going to sustain this are perhaps the asides, and that's where I almost am going to add in that sort of the filmmaking is somewhat weak initially as well, in that sort of like, the B-rolls, the cuts to the scenery and stuff like that, they're not really well done. I mean, even sort of the cinematography, at least initially, isn't really sort of, it doesn't serve as an additional character to, help elevate this movie. But from the very get-go, it is the cast. Cooper Hoffman as number 47 Raymond Garrity, and David Jonsson as Pete McVries. I'm forgetting his number. And of course, the rest of this ensemble cast. These guys do such an amazing job. 22-year-old Cooper Hoffman, son of course, cinema great Philip Seymour Hoffman, who had his very first role in, if you remember, Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza, all the way back in, I think, 2021? This guy, he's so good. David Jonsson, who plays Pete McVries, I mean, these guys, if they do not go, if we don't know what the rest of the year, I mean, sort of has in store for us in terms of acting. But as sort of male leads or even like sort of best supporting leads, these guys have got to get nominations. They are so good. They are so good. I cannot stress how... And again, when I said that sort of adaptations have, there's this balancing act, because the thing is, on the one hand, there are these weaknesses in the first half of the movie, but then those are propped up by how well these two act. And of course, these two act based off of the script and of course, the direction given to them. Cooper Hoffman, who plays Garrity, is young, idealistic, earnest. There's a naivete about him. He's driven by something. You're not sure what that is. We are later, of course, informed. McVries is somebody quite different from, at least his origin story, at least, is quite different from the book. But he is somebody looking for at least a connection, which is something that we also get from another character, Art Baker. He's looking for, I wouldn't even say friendship, he's just looking for something that he never had in his childhood. And he forms that bond from the very get-go, from the starting line with Garrity. And this sort of spell that they cast on you, these two actors, it's something that I haven't seen before. Because, I mean, we've seen sort of ensemble casts before. We've seen actors play off of one another and, of course, have that rapport and chemistry. But sort of never so sustained. Because in this, I mean, perhaps I would say for like 90% of this movie, 95% of the movie, the very frame is occupied by these two characters. So you build that connection with them over time. And then it's very, very hard for you not to develop that connection with them as you go into the second half of the movie. one sort of like, quibble that I have with the script is that sort of they whittled it down from 100, because in the book it's 100 contestants, and in here it's 50, so that by the time you reach the halfway mark, you're almost down to like 10 people, which I think visually, because you can sort of imagine it sort of on this road with sort of like, these half tracks and sort of military, soldiers surrounding them, sort of 100 people walking down the road, and slowly and gradually that number's, being whittled down. The stomps of their boots on the thing. These are all things that I think as a filmmaker, maybe Francis Lawrence didn't really play into. He should have really gotten into that, sort of the visuals of seeing sort of like, this sort of herd almost walking down the road, the sounds they make, them suffering through the elements. There's all of these things that I just thought was lacking there in the first half. But now let's move on to the second half, because that is where this film really comes into its own. And I think for that alone, I would say that this movie now becomes, at least for me, one of my favorites for the year, because as the number reduces down and you are left with like, that main cast of characters, by now, almost about 45 minutes into the movie, you have that with them, with these characters. You know who they are, why they're in it, and what they're doing it for. And then, of course, cruel fate, it starts taking them one by one. And there are moments so emotional. It's just one gut punch after another. There's that one scene with Garrity and his mother, played by Judy Greer. And that was, I was almost welling up in the cinema. There's that scene with Art Baker where he sort of thanks them for being his friends. Another one of those moments. One character that I think, again, the script didn't do justice to is this sort of amalgamation of the Stebbins character and the Scram character. Stebbins is this sort of enigma in the book, in that he sort of makes Garrity almost uneasy, because he's just doing his own thing. You don't know what this guy's motivations are, how he's even made it so far, eating his jelly sandwiches. And then, of course, he's revealed at the end. And in the book, as in the movie, sort of we understand who he is as the White Rabbit. So, I'm not going to give that away. But in sort of hybridizing him with the Scram character, I don't think that either is given their due. So I didn't like that sort of in the script. The ending is different. The ending has been changed. And I think, I'm not going to say for the better, whatever King's motivations were, or reasons for the book's ending are his own, and whatever J.T. Molyneux's are, the scriptwriters are his own. So credit to both of them. There's one thing I didn't like, and I'm going to sort of say, so the thing is that towards the end, where it's just now these two compadres, as McVries puts it, and McVries, I think, sort of understanding that Garrity still has a lot to live for, his mother in particular, decides to just like sort of quit the race. So, he decides, and as he says in the very, initially, that he's like, you know what, I'm just going to sit down. And that's how it's going to end for me. But Garrity quickly comes and picks him up. And he's like, no, just keep on walking for me. And then boom, there it happens. It's Garrity who decides that, no, it's McVries who deserves to live. And he stops, and boom, boom, boom. And I did not expect that. And for me, I thought that was fantastic. That was a really good change to the script, to the story, which was really good. I just didn't like the way that it ended, and I'm not going to say how it ends in particular. Like, okay, well, I've already given away half, so whatever. So Garrity had intended to sort of be on the race because the thing is that his father was killed by the squads run by the Major. So he thought sort of if he wins this race, he's going to ask, he's going to kill the Major as sort of his one wish. McVries fulfills that. I don't know if that was, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that having kind of almost perfected the ending with this sort of switcheroo. I don't think that should have been put in, simply because then you are sort of kind of like, turning this into, one of those typical YA type things that it's always like, people against the system, yes, but then they have to sort of, it's a revolution and they have to change things. I think a braver thing would have been for McVries to, if they were going to add that to the script, where he simply says, oh, you know what? End the long walk. But yeah, I mean, I am definitely going to be watching this movie again, and I hope you guys get to watch it for the first time. But I know that second half is so true to the book itself that, yeah, I think I'm going to have those same emotions that I did have watching it the first time.